Novel diseases are one of the more frightening aspects of any new outbreak because the reality is we have no idea if it will actually mutate. We do not know what the long-term consequences of contracting it are, but most importantly, we do not know initially how it even spreads. Anything that is airborne obviously is really bad. Next, surfaces can be quite an issue given we have to touch everything, and water is of concern, but typically by boiling water, you should be okay. And really, anything relating to blood, while devastating if contracted, is much more easily mitigated. But how would a disease successfully use bodily fluids to spread? Well, look no further than hookup culture to explain a lot of that and how it happens, but while typically regarded as not the most pressing vector, it still has to be met staunchly to contain it under normal parameters. In the events of Apocalypse Z, this is not a normal parameter. As the disease begins spreading quietly enough, it becomes apparent that this is not typical to humanity. As people begin attacking others, this thing may as well have been airborne by how successfully it's transmitted. So in today's episode, let's talk about the disease that it came from, how it affects the human body because there appears to be a lot of rage in the person, and how it might be overcome. But first, this episode is sponsored by Raycon. Go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke to save big for the holiday and get up to 25% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 25% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke. The holidays are upon us once more, and if you're like me, you've asked your girlfriend about 20 times, what does she want for Christmas, and yet somehow there is not a thing on this planet that she actually wants. Well, that's until Raycons make the scene. Practical, stylish, noise-canceling earbuds that produce premium audio at only half the price. Raycons are perfect for any audio lover, and they make a fantastic gift for anyone who says, I don't know what I want for Christmas. With tens of thousands of 5-star reviews, and with their latest model being even better, having a 32-hour battery life and multi-point connectivity, it means you can basically pair 2 devices at once. I personally wear them at the gym, which makes lifting so much better due to the active noise canceling feature. So even though if, lifting to Doom Eternal, the World Spear heavy fighting song isn't for you, they just make an excellent gift for anyone who likes audiobooks, music, watching YouTube, basically anything that involves listening to something. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke to save big for the holidays and get up to 25% off site-wide. All right, let's get back to it. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this content, then let me know by liking it because it really does help the video. Also, I'm posting on Roanoke Tales again, and Roanoke Games is going strong. Kind of playing through Sons of the Forest right now, so check out those, and check out my Discord where we watch movies every month that end up here. All the links are in the description. Also, go check out the merch. But we kick off our story in some European place. I believe this is Spain. It's near Christmas while a woman looks out of the window, and Uncle of the Year has his nephew wanting to see his cat, Lucolo. Unc's sister then comes into the room and they are all headed out after babysitting duty. They do a very European goodbye and begin their drive home in silence. The vibes are way off. Not the vibe. Anyways, so he asks what's wrong and she tells him to admit it, and then he just huffs about it. Very European male of you. Excellent communication skills. So she asks about if they're actually going to have offspring or younglings because that one guy got really angry about me using the word offspring. Anyways, that's a pretty tough one actually. So then they get cut off by a Yaris, which almost kills them. See, if this was an American muscle car, that thing would have detonated on impact. So as they were just sitting there, quite clearly outlined on the road by light, and they should have been seen absolutely, hilariously, a truck then hits them. It's like, I'm assuming this guy just fell asleep at the wheel. So it's now 1 year later. Prometheus wakes up to Lucolo going absolutely ham, wanting to be fed, which is standard cat activities. The European Union Council are meeting about border security. As they talk about a complicated day in Brussels, Unc over here then feeds the kitty, as then we see people rushing borders as the TSJ virus is spreading without really an ability to stop it. Bro received mail for his dead wife, which is probably depressing as all get out, as somebody on TV is infected and is doing the Harlem Shake, not having a good time. So he leaves angry, as on the radio they talk about a possibility of this being a bioweapon. As the guy says this though, he says, I don't actually believe the United Nations report. That's pretty close to reality, isn't it? Heading to the docks, he's there to actually sell his boat to a woman named Maria. Helping them on board, he then heads below to grab invoices from the previous repairs, as then he spots a bracelet on some wood. Getting a flashback? At least it's less traumatizing than the scene from The Last of Us Part 2 when Abby was on the boat with that one guy. Heading back home, he then gets a call from Belen. Not Belind, but Belen. Ignoring that, I have no idea who Belen is. Also, future Roanoke here. I never caught her name at the beginning, but that is his sister. Heading into the store, people are shopping like madmen for cleaning supplies as we get another call. In fact, what was it? I believe, this is what was told to me. I don't know how true it is, but in 2020, when things were going absolutely wild, I had previous no longer family members, I guess is the best way to put it. They're still alive. obviously, but they were putting their groceries outside and lysoling the whole thing. It's like, I get it. I mean, respiratory diseases are scary, but anyways, get that toilet paper, bro. Heading back to the apartment, the news then talks about how everything sucks and this virus is spreading quite quickly, and it's now in the country. Allegedly, it's under control, though. Yeah, okay. Again, I remember monitoring another disease that allegedly only had 5 cases on January 5th. 10 days later, there were over 100,000 cases. That typically indicates it's probably already in the environment. We just didn't know it at the time. Heading to his freezer, he then freezes up some food while dog starts going absolutely ham outside. Calling his sister, the youngling wants to see the cat. Can't blame him for that. This is why I call my brothers. My eldest brother actually has an absolute ham planet, Russian blue, named Hemi. Most cracked out animal I've ever seen. Anyways, so he asks about how his sister is, as she says she has a proposition for him. They're transferring Mario to the Canary Islands, which is her husband, tonight. She tells him that, oh, you should come with us. Like, get your crap packed and get on the plane sort of deal. This is a flight that is leaving tomorrow morning, and once all this calms down, everybody can head back home. But he declines, but half-heartedly, he really wants to go. But who knows, man, the Canary Islands might be pretty sweet. Watching the neighbors start packing up, he does have his bag already packed as well, as Lucolo is upset. Just like Dr. Mambo. You know what? All right, honorary Dr. Mambo. So for some reason, cats cannot handle crates, which is odd as they jump in boxes all the time. Really kind of fickle creatures. So the TSJ virus has mutated into another version. The incubation period is just a few minutes long. Blood spreads the virus as airborne is then ruled out. But this is the kind of something we actually need to talk about. Incubation time for viruses can actually range from a few hours to several weeks. The reasoning is viruses can be extremely active, such as those that take a few hours, and less active in those that take kind of a few weeks to present actual symptoms. Viral pathogenesis is something that when I go back to school, I fully intend on studying a little more in depth, but essentially some viruses can produce billions of copies of themselves after injecting their genetic material into a cell. This can either be encoded into the DNA of the cell, where it will be officially a part of you that can then be produced over time, because as your body actually reads your DNA, it will produce these viruses. But it may also just be that the mRNA that they have is injected, which then is put together by ribosomes. Continuing to build viruses at an insanely high pace, eventually a cell will burst, releasing even more viruses to go and infect the surrounding cells. You can see how this could probably get out of hand if not rectified by the immune system. Utilizing T cells, specifically natural killer T cells, the main option the immune system has at its disposal is to force a cell to enter apoptosis if it is infected. Macrophages can also clean up viruses in the area that may be free-floating, but the fight is a hard one for the body pretty much each time. Now this virus, turning an incubation time into minutes, would absolutely blow everything that we think about viruses out of the water. The only possible way this could even potentially work is if the actual ribosomes were affected and had their speed that they could translate increased. Oh, what's that? That's already happened? 100%. Known as directed evolution of ribosomes, essentially how this would work is by it induces changes in the ribosomal RNA genes, and we've seen this specifically within prokaryotes. This can give ribosomes altered properties that can obviously increase the translation speed as said, and the ability to incorporate non-standard amino acids is also something that we have seen. But this is obviously of great interest due to the fact that this can, as we know it, increase speed by up to 10 times the amount, with 16 times the detail. To explain the incubation period, the infection comes in, I think, 2 waves. The first wave would be the initial infection, which the RNA of the ribosomes are changed intentionally by implanting the viral genetic coding, which is spliced into the ribosomes. This would require some sort of gene tampering ability, likened to what we see with CRISPR. Oh, what is CRISPR? As always, this channel has really become nothing but anglerfish and CRISPR. What an era to be alive. Starting with the bacteria, this is sort of a form of primitive prokaryote immune system, like in its most basic form. The Cas9 protein complex will actually look for a specific sequence in the coding that is floating around the cytoplasm, and if it matches a known viral coding, it will then chop it up to prevent a virus from bursting the prokaryote. Along with chopping up the coding, CRISPR can be used to implant genes as well, and this is obviously like the highlight of the issue. Is this intentional? I believe 100% yes. Like this is not a naturally occurring formation. The Apocalypse Z infection it does not have a natural operation to it, and if it does, everything would have to fall just so to allow for literally any of this. So the virus injects the coding and gene altering CRISPR-like gene editing tool into the cell that then changes the ribosomes. This would speed it up at least 10 times, likely even faster, considering the incubation period is minutes, than the original translation speed could allow for. The mRNA floating around from the virus is now replicated much faster to create these new viruses that then burst the cells rapidly, causing symptoms and then damage to many cells, because Obviously, they're bursting, and this means the body would not be able to keep up with this issue. This can then induce seizures, spasmodic events, aggression, pale skin, and many other symptoms that we will talk about. But because of its incubation period and how rapidly it changes, to me, this does in fact appear to be a bioweapon rather than just your run-of-the-mill infection that got out of hand. So Dr. Mambo continues losing it in his crate, standard, as the plane to Barcelona begins boarding. He gets a text from his sister, as then the flight attendant cannot get any of the tickets to scan. It appears as though the government has basically canceled all flights, or cancelado. That's right, I'm Mr. Worldwide. So Mr. Sweats over here starts getting angry as he starts saying, they want us all to die. Yeah, that's good, brother. Start freaking everyone out and making the situation way worse. So they start getting alerts on all their phones about how things are going to complete crap. One guy then makes a run for it, which, all right, genius, let's think this through to completion. So, do you know how to fly a plane? What happens when you get on board? What do you really intend on doing? Do you think they're just like, oh, everybody's here, let's take off? So Unc then gets a call from his sister saying the incubation time is only a few minutes and he needs to get out of there now. So Mr. Sweaty over here jacks a handheld as the airport then clears out because nobody wants to deal with that. Dr. Mambo continues to be angry in his crate as everyone is stuck in traffic. You know, crates and man aren't so different. When I'm stuck in traffic, I too am angry in my crate with wheels. Travel restrictions are now about to be enforced as a variant in Spain ain't great given how quickly it's able to spread. Everyone starts getting out of their cars as Unc looks over at an older couple and asks them if they need help for some reason. Not really sure why. He then tells them just to turn around, saying they're not going to make it because they're closing all of the roads. All over, everything starts going to crap after the military starts getting attacked by people. Not knowing any of this, Unc then just straight up gets out of his car after slightly pulling it over and then grabs the good doctor and walks out of there. Way to park your car like a bro. Also, fun fact, I had sodium glutamate last night, or monosodium glutamate. I'm like 40% sure I'm about to have a migraine. My head hurts, so we're gonna see what happens. Walking along, Dr. Mambo is continuing to not be happy over his confinement as Unc then sees an ambulance go by. Following it, he sees someone's house has been quarantined as the military tells him to move away. I mean, if it's bloodborne, I guess just don't get bit, but some PPE might be good. Two soldiers then come out holding one guy who's absolutely losing it, which, why just two? Like, brother, have 7 guys holding this dude with collars. Like, no way I'm just going in there with, like, my buddy being like, all right, we totally got him. So walking back to his house after witnessing that, he then releases the good doctor and goes to lay down. Flashing back to the night he wrecked, or really the night the semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and ran into them, I guess, we get to see kind of what happened. Basically, the car got flipped. Thanks for watching. Bellin then calls him, waking him up from that pleasant dream, which the dude needs to charge his phone like you have no idea how long the power is going to last, as Bellin then talks about how the greater the population, the greater the amount of infections, so no matter what, he needs to stay in his house and do not attempt to go to any quarantine zone. Watching the news, a quarantine zone is happening in Munich, as then he watches people basically trying to climb out of windows to evade something, and they're attacking each other in the streets. Yeah, they seem to be going great. I'm gonna avoid quarantine zones as well. Screw that. Also, Instagram Reels would be going absolutely wild. Some people are talking about armoring up so that they don't get bit, and the United States, meanwhile, would just be going full offense, you know? A handheld behind every blade of grass sort of doctrine. Like, I genuinely wonder how this would work in the United States. So an alert happens as Unc then heads to the store to grab whatever he can. People completely forgot how to, never mind. I was gonna say they forgot how to drive, but they never knew how to drive. Everyone then starts picking over the last of the food. Basically, whatever you can carry, just grab it. As he's holding his flatbread, that gets jacked, which it's the old couple from earlier. Like, I'm not really sure why these people are so important, but like, it's just, I guess, how everything changes, because you never see them again. Overhead, jets then fly by, because that's going to be just perfect against zombies. As then heading to a gas station, he starts grabbing supplies as Prometheus runs in and clearly having been bitten. People then start getting attacked as Unc yells at one guy who's clearly infected, breaking off a pipe. The guy shrieks at him as a cop fires a shot out at the infected before he can end up attacking him, as then he gets blood all over his face. That's not ideal. Which is also a bit strange. This is bloodborne, or it's allegedly bloodborne. The cop inside has already turned, while the other cop then checks out of work early. The news continues newsing, and the TSJ virus has just spread rapidly across the globe. This, to me, indicates this is not bloodborne at all. This indicates, oh my god, could it be everyone's favorite virus? Well, we're gonna find out. So Unc then just starts straight up welding stuff together at this point to set up a defensive perimeter around his home. The news talks about how people should comply with these orders, and if you refuse, you'll face legal consequences in the future. Right. Setting up a camera, the government then says they need to evacuate to the safe zone. If you refuse, you are violating the law. Right. I mean, I get it. Yeah, look. We all do crazy things in the heat of passion, Jimbo. So Unc then watches all the people leaving as Dr. Mambo keeps meowing. Bro, you're gonna give away their position. feeding the scholarly gentleman. Unc then gets a buzz at his door. The army is here and they say they know he's in there, which they don't know. They then start beating on the door to get him to come out, as they say they can't waste any more time trying to get him, but the door is pretty much reinforced, so it's not really working. Dr. Mambo then freaks out as the army gives up because the door is too tough for them, as they just say screw it and leave. The next morning, everyone looks like they've left, so I guess everybody's supplies are now yours. It's been 2 weeks as he's been by himself for a while and he's running out of food. Also, there's a house with a solar panel. Take that over immediately. He then sends a message to his sister about where he's at and what he's doing, but he's got no signal, so it doesn't ever actually send. Picking up Dr. Mambo because he made the mistake of being in the same area as him, standard reason for a cat existing, he realizes his food is beginning to run low. He decides maybe he should go to his boat. This is basically I Am Legend, except rather than with a dog, it's with a cat. So after 2 weeks inside, also your stamina would be total crap. Wearing his armor, he then breaks into another building for supplies. As he breaks into several places, everyone appears to have pretty much gotten out as well, but brother, you may endeavor to make some noise before entering a building, as that'll kind of draw out the infected rather than you just going in there and finding them by mistake. In fact, finding one of the doors has already been open. A woman is in there just sort of vibing as she says, I really don't have anything for you to take. Evidently, her husband left with the offspring to get them to safety, and within an hour, his phone was already shut off. She's stuck in a wheelchair, so she stayed behind to wait for them, but he never came back, and then she asks if he has food because she's low also. So Grams here has all the info. She has been watching people from her window for quite a while, as then she points at a house who likely has food. Breaking into the third house, alarms begin going off. So we get this montage of basically him just breaking and entering, as then he finds a dirt bike to make the runs a little easier for food. Returning back to Grandma's, he then gives her a walkie-talkie, and she says they need more food or they really just need to go with the military, as they're gonna eat one another. Grandma, what are you saying? I mean, I don't think you're gonna eat each other. I think he might just eat you. It's the law of the jungle out here at this point. So realizing where there may still be food, he then heads to the quarantine house. Checking for food, he looks at the fish tank for quite a while, as all the fish had gotten at this point, as then he hears someone behind him. Basically, it's just a rando. Firing one of the spears, he's like, well, maybe we can help each other. Like, nah, bro, listen, law of the jungle, as I said. So after spearing the pantry, luckily that hit exactly where he needed, as then he takes all of that food. And, you know, here, now that you found all this, make sure you ration this food. Oh, never mind, I guess just eat a huge meal. That's that good plan. Don't worry about any of that. So Grandma then brings up Unc's dead wife, which said, oh, I hadn't seen her in a while. He then explained she was in a car accident. Maybe it was better she didn't live to see this. See what? So far, it's just been you raiding the neighborhood. Like, nah, excuse me. It may have sounded like I wrote that. Like, oh, it's better she didn't see this. It was him saying that. And so far, not much has happened. So then he shows her some pictures of his wife. Don't scroll too far to the right, I'll tell you that. We've all been there. Also, the power still works, which is fairly surprising, unless it's just running off solar. I'm not really sure. So then he makes another video for his sister and how he didn't take the time to visit this year and why he's sad about that. She was only half an hour away. Although I've heard Europeans won't get in a car for 30 minutes to go visit family. That's just what I've heard. I don't know if that's true or not. Like, quite literally, 30 minutes in a car here. So the city that I'm not really in the city, I'm in the outskirts. Truth be told, I'm more in the rural area at this point. But going from the north part of where I'm at to the south part is like a 30, 40 minute endeavor. I don't understand if you guys aren't doing that over there, but it is what it is. So then he has another flashback of himself just zoning out in the helicopter as he was life flighted. Waking up to the walkie-talkie going off, Grandma is calling out to him. She asks if he has his radio, and then he goes to get the emergency one. Turning to channel 100, it's just classical music, as then she tells him to wait. A message then says come to Arosa Estuary, I believe it was, but Grandma says she doesn't trust it, as there's just going to be like a ton of infected there, as everyone has succumbed. He says, well, maybe we should go, and we can sail there on my boat. He also says he will get there, as then she just kind of stops answering. He then looks out his window to see her with a lantern, as she says, okay, fine, I'll go to the Canary Islands with you, which is interesting as they still have power. Why not just turn on your lights? Once more, Dr. Mambo protests as he's fed. He talks a lot. Calling out to Grandma, he says, I'll be there in 5 minutes to get you, and there's no response. He tries again calling, but no response. Walking over to check out the situation, he gets the key from the potted plant and then heads inside. Not closing the door. Brother, you need to close all doors. He then heads upstairs and he finds a note where she's like, oh, you need to save yourself, as she's pretty much just ended things. And I mean, look, I get it. Horrific events, but like you could have at least tried to go with them. I don't know. It seems like a bit of a jump that may not have been all that necessary. Maybe I'm just saying that. Walking outside, the infected are here, getting jumped. She then goes after him as she bites the wetsuit but can't get through. He then smashes her head in the door as she gets trapped by her hair. Scalping herself, he's able to dome her before she finishes her attack. Dude, this guy is like an expert shot with spears. Running her pockets, he then checks her ID and then puts it in her shirt so that if anybody finds her, they know who she is. So here we see the presentation of symptoms that will take place, which tells us internally what appears to be happening to those that are infected. From what we saw on the TV first, when a person is bitten, the transformation is not immediate, but it does incubate within a few minutes, basically as said previously. But with the new mutation that has arisen, this also appears to be causing massive neurological problems. As the virus bursts cells rapidly, it's very likely going to enter the circulatory system given it's administered through a bite. This would spread around the body quickly in a matter of seconds, but more importantly, it heads to the brain. The initial seizure and contraction of muscles is very likely what we would call a grand mal seizure. The grand mal seizure, also known as a tonic-clonic seizure, involves the loss of consciousness and violent muscle contractions. And this is the defining moment when the person ceases to be and is forever changed. They will still wake up and are in the game, so to speak, but they're not really. The lights are on, but nobody's home. This indicates that these people are infected, but are not zombies, and this makes it worse because that means these are fast zombies, as we will see. As the virus bypasses the blood-brain barrier, which actually happens a lot concerning viruses, it will begin infecting the neurons of the brain. However, it does not completely destroy all of the tissue within your skull, but it can induce a massive amount of damage. Once neurons begin bursting and releasing more viruses, confusion and disorientation, as well as cytotoxic material, would begin to set in, causing even more problems. Impulsivity would begin to become a defining feature, as well as lashing out in anger. The frontal lobe, being part of the brain that balances the emotional aspects of yourself, means that once you remove the shackles of that, the emotional side is allowed to exist unrestricted. As the frontal lobe takes more damage, it should be noted that likely all areas of the brain are experiencing the same thing, so communication in the brain is beginning to break down as well. Eventually, a critical point is reached. The person by now would be violent. Their immune system will likely have responded in kind by creating a massive inflammatory response, which would then swell the meninges around the brain, called meningitis. Well, they're called meninges, but the process is called meningitis, itis meaning inflammation, which would then put pressure on the brain. As this process continues over the course of minutes to hours, the brain would incur more damage, dying off in lesions. As the consciousness is lost, the person seizes and then gets back up. From here, they're running on pure instinct, and the person they once were has checked out permanently due to disruption of the neural communications. Memories, thoughts, feelings, pretty much anything that makes you human are all gone, except for just a few still, I guess, functional portions, which is just going to be survival and rage. Due to the damage that is taking place all over the brain, we can assume that the lower areas associated with instinct are also affected. The amygdala is of great interest concerning this damage because if it does become damaged, then this would be what is actually increasing like the overall aggression levels, which is what we would expect to happen. This being destroyed and then probably entering a depressed state along with the frontal lobe no longer balancing it out would mean that essentially the what it's reporting is just be aggressive to the rest of the brain and to the body. The impulsivity of the lower brain, specifically in the midbrain area, which typically works with the frontal lobe to kind of balance itself out, would also not be receiving proper feedback from that area. So aggression would basically reign from this point, as well as impulsivity. And we can also look to other areas, which kind of explains why people are eating each other, known as the hypothalamus. In those seen to engage in cannibalism in extreme events of hunger, it is known that the hypothalamus will actually become depressed somewhat, which will allow for the disgust associated with eating another person to be decreased. I always like to cite this, but essentially what I was willing to eat when I hadn't eaten for like 3 days, and I was like burning like 10,000 calories a day back in college during a specific event, was absolutely wild. Like, I had no qualms about like chicken liver or basically things that you might find gross. I was like, yeah, dude, I'll eat that. I'm starving. So this allows them to survive by eating. With the hypothalamus damage as well, this would mean a person is really no longer going to have an issue, like a moral issue, so to speak, of eating other people, but it also goes deeper than that. The hypothalamus is associated with the feeling of satiation. So the brain would be reporting extreme hunger to what's left of the surviving neurons because it would not be firing correctly. Impulsivity would be off the charts, hunger's off the charts, basically everything that makes you you is off the charts, like it's gone. So all of this appears to be by design as well. If you were to create something, you would want it to damage the brain, make people more aggressive, make them hungry, and have it spread by biting. Again, like I said, I don't believe that this is spread by blood, given what we will see. Instead, I believe it's spread by saliva. And we will talk about that momentarily, but the infected have started spreading out. So he drinks with his cat, been there. as then he leaves another message for his sister as he gets on his bike and begins heading to his boat. Dr. Mambo, once again, will not be a fan of this situation. Driving down completely abandoned roads, it's pretty odd as then he comes to a checkpoint. And at this point, bro, take one of the many military vehicles. I think that would be your best bet. Looks like a quarantine camp was actually overrun. And who would have guessed gathering up everyone and putting them in one area was a bad plan? Going through the woods, Days Gone style, which I do need to do a video over that, and it's coming out soon, the cat must be having the time of its life. The infected are all running through the area as he nopes out of there, as we see the soldiers had gotten infected as well. Coming to a campground, everybody is infected here predictably also. Who would have guessed? Now you better not put that bike down by accident. He then puts the bike down by accident, predictably, as Dr. Mambo is pissed. Putting the cat on his shoulder, he then goes back to the bike, but it's completely flooded. As the horde continues their approach, he decides against taking the bike because he's about to get eaten, so he just takes off on foot. Running towards the marina, getting through the first door, they then break through that easily, but it gives him enough time to struggle with the second door, which, brother, just climb the thing. My butt would have been over that in like half a second. As he gets through there, though, his boat is gone because he did sell it earlier. Walking into the shop, he then grabs a spear and glow sticks before spotting another boat in the distance. For some reason, not walking to like the closest point on the dock and then jumping in, he just kind of goes halfway and then swims over. Entering the boat, the engine is completely shot as he tries to turn it over several times. Hearing something down below, there's already blood on the boat, which not good as one might assume, as then he opens the door, he spots an infected youngling. Not wanting to mess with that, he then takes a dinghy, as then he leaves a memo for his sister as he thinks he found a way to get to the Canaries. Boating until the gas runs out, he then looks over the edge and then spots people are all in the water, which is not ideal. As then he looks behind him, he spots another boat that is acknowledging him. A few guys with actual force multipliers show up as they tow his boat in. Returning back to home base, they feed Dr. Mambo and him both as the two men ask, who is he and what does he do? The captain wants to know if he lives nearby, where they can kind of hit places, yada yada yada. The translator then asks why he was in the estuary and says he knows where to go. The translator then lies and says, oh, I told him you're an engineer because nobody wants a lawyer, they're completely useless. Hilariously, in the dub, Unc actually says he speaks English very well, except in the subtitles, he's like, yes, my mother was like American or something. He's like, my mother was actually Mexican and he's Ukrainian, which is him speaking Spanish very well. There are many examples of this, but I just found it funny. So they show Unc his room, as then they told him tomorrow he needs to help them on the ship, and that they also have not really run across any survivors as of yet. Waking up that night, though, he looks out the window and spots a group of people trying to get help. The next morning, heading out on deck, one guy is on a bike. It's like, look, I get trying to stay healthy with stamina being fortified, but bro, calories are low. You probably need to ration the amount that you have. The translator then warns Unc not to lie and try to be as informative as possible when telling them about the food that they need to go get. Showing them on the map where supplies likely are, he then comes back out onto the deck and sees the crew going through the family's stuff as one guy then yells at him to come basically fix something. Heading back to the translator room, he then asks what happened to the family last night. He asks if they are prisoners there. Yes, bro, of course you are. He then tells them about the hospital and the helicopter that they can fly out of there. The translator then lies about what he is saying and says, you need to lie too if you want to stay alive, as then he heads downstairs and says, stop asking questions. Returning to his room, he then talks to his cat about planning to get out of there. You know, gotta consult the brain trust as to what they're gonna do, as then he sees a boat tied outside, which means lots of survivors have actually showed up, and yet they're not on the boat. Putting back on his wetsuit and armor, he then puts Dr. Mambo in a bag, who's not happy about that situation as per usual, as then he goes to make his escape. Curious about what's below though, he then heads downstairs and finds a family is tied up from earlier. They freak out as he gets the father to be quiet, like, bro, hold it together for a few minutes. Freeing them, the guy then keeps yelling as he takes a few rounds as they've been discovered. The translator comes down and attacks the aggressor and chokes him out, which is pretty brutal, like eye to eye. And as the rest of the nerds begin mobilizing up on the deck, they quietly make their escape with a screaming Mambo. One guy comes out as Unc then closes the side of the ship as then they push off of the larger boat. The one guy that they saved also gets got as translator gets tagged in the shoulder, but they successfully make it out of there. Just causing the ship onto land, Unc then goes and starts trying to open car doors before finding one guy had turned while trapped by his seatbelt, and he is absolutely losing it. Spearing him through the head, they begin to drive out of there as they go to charge their phone. Victor is barely holding on as they discuss how the captain was a monster and he's constructing a refuge of sorts. He only lets in people that serve him, and the reality is, the longer this goes, the worse it's gonna get. That said, the US is probably faring pretty well given our countermeasures. Once again, I really would like to see what's happening. Like, there is a reckoning coming at some point because any country that has the ability to, fire a handheld is likely going to be the one that fares the best and likely going to be the one that's like, all right, we got to go see how the rest of the world is doing at this point as well. So approaching the hospital, one guy then jumps on the car as Unc gets out, wasting all the ammo that he has, stick to the spear brother, and then entering the hospital. This is about to be the last place you really want to be. Bringing Victor into the operating room, everything is covered in blood. Victor then requests taking the bullet out as Dr. Mambo is then let out of the bag. Hearing noises from a vent, he then goes to check it out as he hears people are talking. Heading over to the vent to follow the noise, the infected are most definitely here. He calls out in the vent and they do respond as someone then asks if he's there as this alerts the infected. I'm sure there's an Among Us joke in here somewhere, I just don't want to make it. So, again, this dude is like a fantastic shot with a spear gun. So more are coming in, hearing the noise, as then he runs to the operating room and locks the door. Victor is already gone as the nurse then opens up some panel or whatever and then lets him in. So they wheel him back, like they wheel Victor is, back into the hospital as 2 women and 3 younglings are there. Petting Dr. Mambo, they then ask if he scratches. Well, maybe. Dr. Mambos are known to do that, but the damage is minimal and they're furry, so it's an equivalent exchange. Blood for the fur god and all that. Unc then asks about the helicopter as she says there's no way to really get down there as they can't get across to that part of the building. That night they discuss how they are almost out of food as the younglings' parents are all gone. Sister Cecilia says they try to get them to talk about their parents at least once a day, and the nurse says the point is you don't resist the pain, you learn how to live with it and let it go. Which that's actually the key to grieving. If you cover it up with vices, you're really doing yourself no favors. Only way to get over something is, unfortunately, to go through it. So we now get a flashback to where Unc's wife died. Sitting at the same bedside, Dr. Mambo approaches to explain where all this medically went wrong, as clearly years later, he's still going, or a year later, he's still going through it. He then ties the bracelet to the old bed as then he heads to the roof. Watching them walk around, he starts getting every notification ever from his sister as he watches through the mall. Each one is getting more and more concerned as she's like, hey, I can't really contact you. He then sends another message as he begins hearing some shots being fired off. Oh Lord, the Russians have returned. He reports back to the others that they need a GTFO now. Packing away the good doctor once more, they all cover their mouths from the smoke. And for some reason, I'm not really sure how these fires are still burning after all this time. Like, it's been several weeks, right? So walking through, they then hear the men upstairs as they continue their escape. The door was warped from the heat, so they have to use an axe to get out, but that makes so much noise, an infected hears it as Sister Cecilia gets immediately bit. Unc then starts burning the face of the infected as the nurse then takes that guy out with an axe. The sister gets up and then tells them to stay away from her and just save the younglings. Moving into the next room, the infected are all over. One of the younglings then sees her mom as then they shut her up because she's like, Mom, it's not your mom anymore. Life be that way. Walking through, one of the infected does see them as then they run to basically a storage bin, not a storage bin, what do they call those things? Like a cabinet, as then a bunch of shots ring out. The Russians have arrived and somehow they get saved by the Russians without the Russians realizing that they were saving them, classic, as then getting basically to the next room. They look at the helicopter and he's like, how long is this gonna take to start? Seeing some carts, they just straight up like, this is from All of Us Are Dead when they were in the gymnasium. They surround themselves with these carts and then start moving through. Predictably, it goes about the same way. Like the cartwheel then hits something and the infected begin there. It's very strange. So becoming a massive brawl, they then get to the fence, but the gate is locked. Also, I just want to point out again, everyone is getting blood all over them. This further indicates that this is not a bloodborne disease. So actually, you know what? We can finally talk about this. When we first saw Unc exposed, it was when the cop domed the infected initially, and he literally got blood all over his face and his eyes. It exists in the mucosa membranes, and he most definitely got blood in his eyes. This would be an immediate infection. Like all throughout the movie, there are a few instances that he would either get blood in his eyes, his mouth, his nose, and yet still no infection. So is it more believable that he's immune or that the virus doesn't actually involve the blood in this capacity? Well, I believe it to be the latter over the former. The blood, while transporting the virus initially, very likely does not really stay in the blood. Instead, it moves into the cells, such as the neurons, where it wants to infect, and the bite is what initially forces the virus into the bloodstream through the broken skin, which means the virus is actually in the saliva. So I'm about to Roanoke Gaming trademark this move. This is an altered form of rabies, which is everybody's favorite virus, I know, but it has to be altered. Typically when rabies is introduced into the system, it will travel up the peripheral nervous system depending on where you are bitten. If you're bitten in the spinal cord, it's just going to travel up the central nervous system. So while eventually proteins in the central nervous system will rocket it to the brain, the peripheral nervous system is a little slower, which is what gives you time. But know this, it does infect the neurons of the brain, and this will have a tremendous amount of consequences to the brain as it becomes damaged. Aggression rates will increase, at least in animals. In humans, you're not really gonna bite somebody for just no reason typically, so it's not gonna spread in humans by biting. However, it will replicate in the salivary glands in massive numbers so that it can be spread. Given what we see, it is clear to a degree that this is an engineered form of rabies that is designed to increase ribosomal translation speed to allow symptoms to begin in a matter of minutes rather than days or weeks. This was likely initially created in order to overwhelm local hospitals and law enforcement, requiring likely the mobilization of the military to deal with the cases springing up, which would kind of create a divided attention in case anybody wanted to do something. However, the problem with creating something like this is you really never know how it's going to mutate. Perhaps it was created with mutation in mind, so that it would be more difficult to create a vaccine for, but this instability in its own genetic coding would in turn cause it to form new traits that were never initially intended. Ultimately, this was not something that could be contained, as whoever created it didn't really know the entire effects, which honestly, it's sort of like when the US created nukes. After using them, we were like, all right, let's never do that again. In fact, we didn't even really know when first testing it out if it would just ignite the atmosphere and then burn the whole planet. FAFOing for humanity seems to be pretty standard amongst us, unfortunately. But the outcome of this was one that was essentially a form of rabies that rapidly builds up in the body, but through spreading, mutated into something that was even faster growing that could not be contended with. This is actually legitimately an extinction level event. Once entering the neurons, it would then begin infecting them because it bypasses the blood-brain barrier, causing the aforementioned damage, which is going to create a ton of issues, then make everybody more aggressive. It should be known that in normal rabies cases, your frontal lobe is still very much so functional. So you're not, like I said, you're not just gonna be biting people. And again, biting people because you're feeling aggressive is not really what we do anyways. We usually just throw hands. So all of this is to say, those who get, humans who get infected with rabies, that's not how we act. So the nurse then hits the lock with the axe, as then they all run to get to the chopper, basically. They then close up the gate as they all jump on board. Victor can't get it started as the infected begin climbing over, which is interesting as now they can climb. That is never seen before. This does indicate that they do have a level of motor skills that is still pretty good at working in the body. Like, the damage should be pretty high, but evidently the cerebellum is still fairly intact, along with the primary motor cortex. So Unc gets out and then starts going ham on them as Victor is able to finally get the helicopter started. The Russians arrive just in time to stop them as Unc lets the infected overwhelming pretty much everybody there. The helicopter then gets attacked as he's able to get the gate pushed back and then get on the helicopter before the infected are able to get him. Getting on board, great work, team. I'm surprised it really went down that way. I thought he was gonna basically sacrifice himself. So flying towards the Canaries, he then gets a call from his sister. Talking to her, she asks where he is right now as he says, "Oh, I'm on my way to the Canaries." She then starts freaking out saying, "Do not come to the Canaries," as two jets fly overhead. Clearly, they shoot down anything that gets close. And thus concludes Apocalypse Z. So this virus, to me, appears to be a form of rabies that has been altered to be not just more infectious, obviously, but the infection time is sped up to produce these actual pathogens. In this ability to increase the ribosomal translation speed, obviously neurons would burst much more quickly, which would induce this massive neurological damage, which could be a problem. So the question now becomes, how do you actually stop this from progressing? Well, to be honest with you, I don't believe, given the fact that it is able to do this, it's going to be accomplished very easily. You would need to have something essentially stop your ribosomes from doing their jobs, which would be the only way that you could probably progress forward and stop this from actually becoming an issue. But if you just stop your ribosomes from doing their jobs, you're gonna have a lot of other issues kind of crop up. So really the only thing that you could possibly do is you may be able to administer preemptively some sort of gene editing tool, again the Cas9 protein complex, that would be able to take in this incoming information that is trying to turn the ribosomes into this faster production speed, and then it destroys it. But the problem is that if you administered some sort of medication like this to those already infected, their brain is already damaged, so what would come back would be a less aggressive vegetable, essentially. We say people are in vegetative states, obviously. So would there really be any point of bringing somebody back who's already infected? Probably not. This would just basically be a preemptive medication. But even then, given the mutation rate that this has and how quickly it was able to mutate, don't even know if that would work. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. How do you think you would stop this virus? I think we'd all be screwed. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales and Games channel link in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronaut, Tristan Kessick. Thank you, my man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And to my scientists, Eris, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan, and Felix Hellstrom, I do appreciate y'all's support as well. And the rest of my patrons, you guys are absolute ballers. You keep everything running smoothly, so thank you. But all right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.